Welcome everyone to our session on uncovering the truth, how executive investigations discover the facts. We have with us guest speaker Nona Patronite today, and so excited. And I apologize to anybody who was confused on the time. We are working across several different time zones, and unfortunately, times tend to switch. So, our apologies for that error. But again, welcome to Uncovering the Truth, How Executive Investigations Discover the Facts. So let me go on with the announcements and news and upcoming sessions for you. So here are our upcoming sessions. One that I wanted to flag for you is the one on November 4th, I believe, and that is going to be on finding your purpose and fulfilling it through your search journey. So I'm very interested in that. Sherry LaSala was an executive coach that I had the pleasure of doing a course with over several months, and it was shortly after that that I met Mark and Luke, the co-founders of Searchfunder. So I don't think it was a coincidence that I did all that hard work through her course and I ended up on this path. And I'm delighted to have her come in as a speaker for Searchfunder to talk about it. So let me turn this over now to Nona. And Nona is with LCG Advisors. She's managing director of their investigative services group, and she's going to give us the ins and outs of what we need to know. I'm sure we all have questions about, is this investor legitimate, or is the business owner what he says he is his team what they say they are, and how can I trust this, and how can I verify? I guess is more like trust, but verify. So welcome, Nona. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your being here, and thank you for being so gracious with all the little snafus we've had along the way. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks. Welcome everyone to this session. As Karen mentioned, I'm Nona Patronite. I'm with LCG Advisors. We're based in Tampa, Florida, and we are a transaction advisory firm. We offer advisory services across the due diligence excuse me. We provide wide-ranging due diligence support services, include things like collateral field exams, quality of earnings, investigative services, which is what we're going to talk about today. I joined LCG Advisors as the head of their investigative services group, and our efforts are focused on mission critical background investigations for management and also for buyers and sellers of businesses. So if any of you are really hoping to get some tips on how to check out a potential boyfriend or girlfriend or your significant other, I think that you probably have the wrong webinar, because we're going to focus on business. Our focus is on business investigations, and I'm going to give you a few examples of how we've applied our investigative techniques and what I consider to be 5 takeaways that should help you along the path of deciding on when to hire a background investigative service and which investigative services to choose. One of the best parts of my job as a private investigator is that I'm exposed to a lot of interesting people and situations. So I'm going to tell you a few stories and how executive investigations uncover the facts and the human capital that drives your businesses. So that takes us to deciding what type of due diligence is best for you. Okay, there are generally 2 different types of people human capital diligence available. One is called background screenings and one is investigations. Screenings are automated in nature. They have a limited reach, and they're based on items and jurisdictions that you as the user select. These platforms offer packages and a la carte options, but the nature of screening doesn't generally result in the type of deep dive that you may want to do. Background screening is just as deep as the selections that you make. This may be a deterrent for investigating large-scale deals and management teams. It's certainly a very good choice for when you're looking at non-management employees, but in my opinion, it's insufficient for a business buyer to use for reviewing an owner, potential management team, or someone that you expect to stay in place after an acquisition. By the manner in which they work, screenings are offered by dozens of companies. They're inexpensive in comparison, and they generally can do a background screening for $50 to $150. Again, that's based on what your selections are. It has nothing to do with, they do not select the jurisdictions that you're going to work with. So that you say, well, that might suit my needs just perfectly, and it's an easy way to get my human capital reviewed. But while you might be deterred by a higher cost of an investigation, you have to consider it an investment. It's an investment in the deal and in the future of your organizations. Think of it as an insurance policy, that you want to buy insurance before the deal so that you don't get burned along the way. You don't hesitate to do legal diligence. You don't hesitate to do financial diligence. So shouldn't you really take the time and effort to do human capital diligence? Look at the management team, look at the potential CEO that's going to be sitting in that chair. And if you look at the numbers across the board, you're going to find that the cost of an investigation is many times less than what you're going to spend on other diligence that you unquestionably perform in a business deal. So that brings me to telling you guys about what I've learned along the way as an investigator for many years. Here's a few best practices to utilize when you're going to hire someone for an executive screening, or excuse me, investigation. I'm a private investigator by trade, and I've been doing business investigations for many, many years. In that time, I've come up with these best practices that are applicable when embarking on the process. These are my top 5, and I hope I can share them with you and give you some real life examples of how they apply. First and foremost, in every situation is you want to hire someone that's a reputable, seasoned investigator. Hiring a reputable, seasoned investigator with experience and a reputation to match are absolutely critical. They are going to drive the investigation. They are going to be looking at your potential targets or subjects, and you want to get the best information that's out there. Here's a good practical example. A private equity firm used an online screening service to perform a background check on its existing CFO in a manufacturing company that they were going to acquire. Well, the CFO was going to be staying on and after the investment, and they wanted to ensure that his credentials were valid. So what they did was they used a screening service and did a low-cost platform search that was limited to the jurisdictions that they knew to be applicable to that executive. What the PE firm found was that they were unable to speak to anyone at the screening company, so they were confused when they received their findings, and they couldn't discuss with anyone what were the next steps that we were going to undertake. So what our process is, and what we did in this situation, is we were retained by them after the fact to get the lowdown on what the initial findings produced. So my process included doing multiple criminal checks across various data sources, including direct access to state records. This resulted in the identification of a narcotics charge that wasn't found using the online platform. Without a person to examine and analyze information, the criminal record was overlooked. Now, granted, this criminal charge was from a long time ago, but nevertheless, it was out there, and you as a consumer deserve to have all the information at hand so that you're the one making the decision, not relying on what a possible acquisition tells you about the operation, about their executives. So what we did was we went in and we brought that information to our client, and after they determined that it was okay to bring him on, it was more than 25 years ago, and they felt comfortable because of the interaction that they had had with him, they were fine bringing him on. So that was one instance where our information was valid and useful to them, and they knowingly made a decision and knew what was the skeletons in the closet, if you will. So think about that when you're doing a screening, is will it capture the information from a long period of time? That's something that you as a user are going to want to know. So that brings me to our next best practice, and this is the one that's highly debatable, and it's when to hire the investigator to do the human capital investigations. So there's a couple schools of thought on this, and I think it just varies by who you ask and what their position is within the M&A community or the investment community. But in my opinion, I've seen it where investigators have been hired at the onset, and I've seen it where they've been hired in the later stages of the due diligence process. So speaking from the onset of an investigation first, what that's going to provide you is that insurance policy I was talking about. You're going to spend a relatively low amount of money, and you're going to know what is in that person's background, what's their method of operation, what does their professional CV look like, and are they portraying themselves to you in the manner that you find in the public record. Other thoughts are, well, I don't want to invest at the beginning of the process, so I'll wait until the last segment of the due diligence process. From an investigative perspective, what I see is that damaging you and possibly costing you thousands and thousands of dollars, because if you go through the whole due diligence process and then you find that it's an unsavory character or that they are going to have a reputational risk, then that is, that's going to play on your judgment and your decision making. And is it going to be too late in the process to extinguish that relationship, if you will, or is that damage bad enough, their reputation poor enough, that it would call you off the deal completely? I think that is something that you have to decide, but from our perspective, the insurance policy, you get a great deal of reward for the little bit of investment that you make at the front end. I'm sure that there are people that would challenge me on that, and if you have a specific instance that you want to discuss, I'm happy to discuss it and hopefully help you come to a determination of when best to do that human capital investigation. So along those lines, let me give you another example. Private equity firm is going to invest in a large energy company, and they were extremely far along in the due diligence process. So they asked us to do a mission critical executive investigation on the CEO. They wanted to ensure that his credentials were valid, that he had claimed that he had a degree from a prestigious New York university, and that he also had many years experience in the space. As it turned out, he did in fact go to that New York university that he claimed to have gone to, but he never graduated. So you have a white lie. But you have to ask yourself, if somebody's willing to make a bold statement as to, I have this degree, but I haven't finished the coursework, is that person going to make bad statements or questionable statements about your business? that's a huge reputation red flag, that when you don't have the credentials that you say that you do. Unfortunately, you can't coach somebody to take back, when they have put out in public records and in press releases and so forth that you've attended a school and you've graduated that school. That's a fine line distinction between the two, but it is something for you to consider about the reputation of this individual. So what happened was in our situation, they decided not to bring this man on or to continue him as the CFO or CEO, excuse me, of the company, because once misinformation is in the public realm, regardless of how big or small it may seem, it's always going to be there, and a trained, seasoned investigator is going to find it. And so you need to be aware of that, and you need to be cautious and ultimately looking at your bottom line so that you're not taking a misstep on human capital. So, which brings us to the next part of it, which is his credentials and employment verifications. These are extremely important in these situations where you have private equity investments and mergers and acquisitions and so forth. You need to know that that person is who they say they are. And a seasoned investigator like myself, we profile that person for you. We're comparing self-reported information to what's out in the public record. We're looking at what they say on LinkedIn, we're looking at what they say in media reports, and we're looking at social media. Social media has become hugely important in the whole investigation process of employees and mission critical personnel. We use it every day in every investigation that we conduct, and employment and verifications of school education and philanthropical investments and representations are important to knowing the real person behind the desk. The most common finding when you're doing an executive investigation is the misrepresentation of credentials or professional history. We find that many subjects have lie or exaggerate on their resumes, their LinkedIns, their biographies. These types of misrepresentations vary. Sometimes they're as simple as an inaccurate job title, but other times they are just so far off of what that person really is that you have to question how they even got to where they are today. You can't leave those kind of screenings or those kind of verifications up to a screening service. What you should know about screening services is, yes, they offer verifications of employment and education, but what they don't offer is typically, well, let me step back. What those services generally do is they will try to reach out to the employer or the school 3 times, and that's what you're paying for, are those 3 attempts on the verification. If they don't get that verification in 3 attempts, then that's all that they're going to do. However, if you use an investigator, that investigator is going to continue to call the same companies, call the same people over and over until they get a verification or find that the records to confirm such employment or education no longer exist. And that's really not the case in education. Those records seem to go back for many, many, many decades. But in employment situations, it's not always true. Companies are not required by law to keep those files on record for extended periods of time. And we actually have some clients that we go back 15, 20 years verifying their credentials. So it's nice to know that somebody exhausted the path before they selected to tell you that there wasn't a verification possible. This is one of my favorite stories. It's relatively new. We have a hedge fund client in New York, and they were going to hire an MBA candidate who was going to come on and run one of their departments. So they asked us to do an executive background screening on this individual. Well, the individual claimed to have had more than, excuse me, I'm sorry, I was telling the wrong story at this juncture. So let me start again. The hedge fund hired us for an executive on a board of a foreign corporation. And that executive claimed 20 years experience at a high level managerial position. Actually, we found that he only had 2 years managerial experience, and that although he was in that financial space, he hadn't operated at that highest level, which was critically needed for that board appointment. So as a result, that executive was not placed in that directorship role. So the other story that I was going to tell you has to do with looking beyond the jurisdictions associated with the subject. And I'll tell you the story and then tell you why to go back to checking jurisdictions are so important. The same hedge fund was going to hire an MBA who was going to be in a managerial position with the firm once he completed his degree. We were asked to do a background check on him, and he lived in one jurisdiction, New York. He also went to school in New York and had lived in Connecticut. What we found was, yes, we searched New York and Connecticut, and aside from a long list of liens and judgments, he, lo and behold, had a case in the Midwest. We dug deeper and we find that in the Midwest, he was charged in a federal court with theft and fraud in conjunction with a exotic car exchange. He received a Porsche and he was given $250,000 for the exotic exchange, but he forgot to give the car back to the dealership. He claimed it got stolen. So he had the money, he had the car, and the dealer was out. So what he did was he took it one step further and he retitled the car and sold it to another exotic dealership. So he developed this web of transactions, and the long and the short of it is he was ultimately found guilty of these charges, and they sought restitution in excess of $200,000. This was a huge mid six-figure position that he was going to fill. And what this armed our client with was the information that he had character flaws, he had litigiousness in his background, and he also had the liens and judgments, which I won't even go into now, which across the board made him a poor selection for such an important decision or position. So, you need to know the facts. And when you look for facts, you need to look beyond the jurisdictions that are right there in your face. And that's what an investigator is going to do. We're going to do a deep dive across the country to the extent that we're able to. We're going to look at state records. We're going to look at county records, and we're going to look at federal records, bankruptcies, whether or not there's any kind of indication in their particular industry of any kind of disciplinary action, sanctions, anything like that. What that does for you is it gives you enough information that you have the big picture. You are fully informed about the validity of the person's reputation and what they're bringing to the table. Keep in mind that one of the things, it's a pet peeve of mine, but there's many firms out there that will say, we do national searches. Well, that may be that they do some national searches with proprietary databases, but those databases are not a one-stop shopping. You can use LexisNexis, but that is not going to give you all the records that could be out there in the public record. You need to go to the source of the document records. You need to go to the available national quote unquote databases and do a search from there. And if anybody tells you this is where I get very passionate. If someone tells you that there is a national FBI search or a national criminal search, you're talking to someone that's not informed. There is not such a thing as a national criminal search. It does not exist. Yes, you can do a wide net search of many jurisdictions, but it doesn't incorporate all of them. The only way to get a national criminal search conducted is through the FBI. And that's when people in the financial world, when they submit their fingerprints and those are sent to the FBI, that is what they're searching for at that point in time. If an investigator tells you they're doing a national criminal search, they're not. So you just need to keep that in mind and realize that what they're telling you might not be all inclusive of everything that's available to you out there. Lastly, I think I'd like to tell you a little bit about why client expectations can drive limited or incomplete results. Now, this is where you guys come in as the searchers or as the clients, because you need to keep in mind that we're the professionals at this. You have a good idea of the company that you're investing in. You have an idea of where they're located and what they're doing, but your expectation can totally drive a limited or incomplete result. So that could be a poor decision to do everything based on just your knowledge bank and not relying on the searches that an investigator can do. For example, Connecticut client wants a limited background check on a mid-level employee, says, I know they live and work in Connecticut, that's what we're gonna do. We want to search Connecticut. So we do that and there's no records found. But what happens is we find there's a whole lot of records in Maine. Well, they, had we just gone by what the client told us, or had they used a screening service, they may not have recognized that those records existed. And as a result, they may have missed the records that we found, where we would be able to tell the client, look, there is a presence in Maine or wherever. Would you like us to continue? And then that's on you. It's up to you to make that decision. We're not going to follow all of the trails unless authorized to do so by our clients. And that's why working with an investigator hand in hand, especially in early searchers' careers, is helpful, because we can guide you, whereas you may not, know what your role is, but you may not know everything that's going to help you in the end of discovering the background of human capital. So you might not make the best decisions as far as the executive screenings. So anyway, those are my top 5 tips. I appreciate you allowing me the time to speak with you, and I'd love to take any questions that you might have.
Well, first, I want to thank you, and I hope everybody will give you applause or a thumbs up. That was a wonderful, really, really appreciate it. I'm going to open this up for questions. Folks can put questions in the chat if they would like. We are a small enough and intimate enough group that if you want, you can raise your hand and I will call on you, and you can unmute and ask directly. I wanted to just do one follow-up. We gave that example of someone saying that they had graduated from a school when they had attended it. And as somebody who graduated from multiple schools, I really prize that feat of actually getting the diploma. I was wondering, do you mainly see the white lie, like the exaggeration, or is it that flim-flammery like the guy who did the Porsches?
Most often, people are generally good. but they do like to exaggerate their credentials and their backgrounds, especially things having to do with position titles or the experience that was required for a particular position. I think that generally your interviews with them is going to reveal those white lies, but the credentials themselves, that's where we see a lot of misrepresentations. The white lie about attending a college and graduating happens more frequently than you would think. And all those people probably have very good reasons of why they didn't finish school. But what they should do is simply state that they attended a university, rather than I graduated, because that distinction, as you mentioned, Karen, is really important. And I don't know of many people that are going to walk away from a situation just because someone attended rather than graduated. But you need to be clear on what you did, or working for a company, exaggerating the size of the company, exaggerating the overall control that you had at the company, what your position was. You were the number 2 man, where in fact you were probably 20th on the pecking order. Those are the kind of white lies that we see.
Do you actually talk to employers, or is it based on the documented evidence that you can find?
It varies on client. In the due diligence process, we have people complete, or we suggest that they complete an questionnaire of sorts that just basically gives their basic identifying information, and we develop it independently with using their CVs, their resumes, and LinkedIn as the comparison documentation. So if you have on your LinkedIn that you went to Stanford, we are going to confirm through Stanford that that is in fact where you graduated. If you went to another Ivy League school, but you don't say what school it was or when you graduated, that's always questionable. But I think you people are smart enough that you're going to be questioning that from the onset. And so that might be the red flag you need to have a deep dive investigation conducted.
And so let's say somebody says, I worked under Jeff Bezos or something. I was like, as an example, would you actually reach out and contact, somebody on Jeff Bezos' team to see if they were actually worked on it, or were they just schlepping coffee in and out of the room?
Again, it would depend on the circumstances and the type of assignment. We would definitely contact the employer and confirm that they worked there. And then we would seek to identify information that might be in the media or in social media that would correspond to that statement that they made. For example, if they are identified as the media contact on a press release, then we're going to know that they were in fact in a position that they could have interacted on a daily basis with him.
So I think some folks might be tempted to say, you know what, I want to forego the cost of doing an investigation unless I see a red flag like the Ivy League thing, just to double check, or if maybe I get a feeling because they've just told way too many fishing stories where they caught the whale, and it's just a few too many whoppers. Would you recommend that? I have a feeling I know the answer. If I want to. Would you recommend them holding off?
I would recommend, generally speaking, there are exceptions to every rule, but at the onset, again, the cost is just so much less than other types of diligence that it is worth the investment. Would you rather spend a couple $1,000s at the front end and know that this is a person that you don't want to do business with, or would you rather wait until you've spent the money on the legal diligence, the financial diligence, the quality of earnings, and all of those other aspects of the process. I think that the answer for anybody that is cash conscious is going to be that they want to spend it at the front end. Again, there are people that are of the opinion that they know the party, they've worked with them, they're comfortable with them, and that's great. And you just hope that they aren't burned somewhere down the line at the end of the process.
How much information does the prospective customer have to give you about the, say, business owner? Let's say I'm a searcher, I'm doing a deal, it's now under a letter of intent. I'm pretty excited about the business. We've had a few conversations, but it's not like I've, sat down and said, okay, what's your social security number or something like that with the person.
I do know that there are some companies that part of their process is to request that there be a consent signed for a background investigation. That is obviously the greatest thing out there, because that allows us to do any of the searches that we would do, including criminal checks. Without a consent, there are limitations as to what we can do. But if you choose to look at a company, say you're not completely sold on the idea of this company being, for you, you might want to do some preliminary work. So we might look at somebody without consent and give them what's out there in the public record, which is quite a bit, but it certainly doesn't tie together things like their personal credit report, their personal driving histories, their criminal records at the state level. And by that, I mean, you can be criminally charged in any court, but many states have a central repository where you can send the records, and most law enforcement offices deal with that repository and send the records there. So if you're sitting in, one of the exceptions is California, but if you're sitting in New York, for example, and you have a person that lived and went to school in New York, you might want to have a criminal check done there. And the New York statewide criminal covers the entire state of New York. Whereas in California, you would have to go county by county and search for records that way. The police records are not public record in California.
Oh,
So,
so we have a question in the chat from Orlando, and Orlando asks, in your experience, should I be concerned if the executive candidate restricts or limits the investigation or search?
it depends on what manner they restrict it. If they are telling you only talk to these four, sources of information, or these four people that can speak to my work ethic, I'd be concerned. If they are restricting it and saying that we only want you to look here, then of course, as from an investigative perspective, I'm like, I'm going to look everywhere, including that location. It depends on circumstances, how well you know the party, whether you get the feeling that they're misrepresenting themselves to you, or that they have something to hide. The gut is a very powerful tool in evaluating people. The distinction with an investigator is we deal in facts. We're not giving you gut opinions. We're not giving you our feelings of whether someone's warm and fuzzy or they're very business-like at all times. What we're looking for is the facts, and that's what we provide to you. So I would err on the side of telling your investigator, I just am not feeling totally comfortable with this. Maybe you should take a deeper look at it. We do have clients that have told us in the past about litigation, and the transparency of some subjects is much better than others, but I'd question it if I were you.
I want to check for additional questions. Feel free to raise your hand and unmute. This is really wonderful. And I do want to mention that Nona is the only investigator on Searchfunder, our first and only. And I was so excited when I saw her application come through. I was like, we have to have you on because it's just such an important service. And I think it will give people a lot of peace of mind. Uh,
That's what we go for, is making you comfortable in your decision making. As I mentioned before, my contact information is on the last slide. If you have any particular situations that you'd like to just hash out, I'm free to talk to you. I'm happy to talk to you, and maybe I can help you in some small way.
And if, with your permission, I can also add your slides to the event landing page for folks to see it later, and that way you'll have the contact information there too.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we have another question. Orlando, thanks
Sure.
for the answer to the earlier one. This asks, you may have already covered this, but I'm curious to know how much it costs to run an investigation. What is the range?
It's a very fluid number, and it's based on a couple of key facts. Number one is the person that we're researching have a very common name. Obviously, if you have the name Smith, it's going to be a lot more time consuming than if you have the name like mine, Patronite. That is one of the factors. The other factor is how many jurisdictions are we looking at? If we're looking across the country at 4, 5, 6 jurisdictions, you might find that it would be a little bit more costly than it would be if you had someone who was born and raised and educated in one state or one location. So having said that, the range, and this is just a range, is anywhere from $800 to $3,000, just depending on those factors. And some people have a long history. So if you have a long history, that's another factor that goes into the amount of time it takes to complete a background investigation such as this.
So what if I'm a searcher, and Orlando, thanks you for that. Says makes sense. Thank you. So what if I'm a searcher and I've just heard you speak, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my deal is closing really soon. Like, how quickly can you do a decent investigation if somebody's in a
Oh,
pinch?
great question. Great question. I'm proud to say that we are on the low end of the scale. Most investigators are taking 2-3 weeks to complete investigations, and we're doing them in 5 to 7 business days.
I want to thank
Okay.
you again. A wonderful presentation, and thank you for your graciousness with the snafus. And I look forward to learning more from you on Searchfunder. Thank you, Nona.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone.